we get to the 37th gate. And whenever you're looking at the 37th gate, obviously on the other side of the 37 is the 40. So you're dealing with an opposition in the wheel that is a definition in the body graph. And that is always significant. We have three examples of that, the 2034, the 4323, and here in this particular case, the 3740. Obviously, that means that any kind of nodal configuration that is going to lead to a definition, you're obviously dealing with something that has immediate and evident impact on the surface, and it becomes a very powerful force. The 3740 also leads to a dilemma, and it is a way of seeing right now that in some ways could be very important to humanity. Many of you know that in terms of global cycles, that in 1610, which is now a long time ago, in 1610 we entered into the cross of planning cycle. And the cross of planning is the 4037 and the 9 and the 16. And the cross of planning cycle comes to an end in 2027. Everything about the way in which our civilization operates, everything about the way in which our the infrastructure of our planet operates, the institutions that we have, the way in which those institutions work, all of those things are a byproduct of the cross of planning. The global institutions we have, the corporate institutions we have, the educational institutions, the scientific institutions, all of them are a byproduct of this cross of planning. And we are coming to an end of the vitality of this particular pattern. By the time we move beyond 2027, this age of communal, collective organization is going to come very quickly to an end. So somebody who has personality 3740 nodes, they are here to see this world of planning. In other words, they are here to see the basic construct in the community. Now, when you look at the 37th gate is the gate of the family. Obviously, it's emotional. It's in the emotional system. Interesting that the 37th gate is the gate of the mouth. Now, that is a metaphor, but it's important to think about the 37th gate that way, because the 37th gate is always looking for food resources as one of its major themes. It is always looking for affection, which is one of its major themes, because in fact, the 37th gate is a gate of affection. It does put affection out, and it puts affection out as a tool in order to attract the 40th gate at the other side. And the 40th gate is a gate of ego power. As a matter of fact, the 40th gate is the gate of the love of work, interestingly enough. So if you can manage to be affectionate enough with the 40th gate, that might work for you. Because that's the basic bargain. And the 40th gate is the stomach. So you've got this combination of the mouth and the stomach. And it says something very important about the underlying theme of any kind of civilized construct, the way we have. That the underlying theme of it is, how easy is it to provide the sustenance? First, the sustenance, food. To be able to provide the basic needs. So if you've got a 3740 nodes, you look out in the world and you see whether the basic needs are there or not. And when you see that the basic needs are not there, your attention is looking for some kind of way, some kind of institution that can deal with that. Isn't there somebody who can do something about this? Is the theme of the cross of planning. Always has been. And the cross of planning is the bedrock of our communities. See, we have a very, 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 very false sense of how well we've done in organizing things. Because what we're seeing from our perspective now is the end of the cycle and its accomplishments. But it doesn't mean that this is going to continue to go on. Now, if you have the 40th gate is the gate of deliverance. And everything about the way in which, the ego operates is that this is one of the fundamental problems on the planet, is the open ego. There is a majority of human beings who have an undefined ego. And having an undefined ego is one of the fundamental sicknesses that we have in human psychology. Because the undefined ego brings to the not self, brings a sense of inadequacy, brings a sense of lack of worth, and obviously this creates a lot of problems. In other words, so many human beings, in the way in which they operate, are conditioned by a not-self mind that says, do this because it'll prove you're worthy. And in most cases, it ends up just reinforcing their sense of unworthiness to begin with. When you're dealing with the 4037, obviously you're dealing with a defined phenomena. And so it's interesting to see that these 4037 nodal people, they are very, very important to us now. And these are the voices that you're going to hear that are going to start speaking louder and louder at the dysfunction of the established institutions. And they all go by a name. It's called NGO, non-governmental organizations. And at the root of all non-governmental organizations is the perspective that can be seen out of the 4037 eyes, because right now, anyone with 4037 eyes that can see properly is seeing everything's falling apart. It's just falling apart. And you can see that at the very surface in terms of, terrorism, as an example. It is obvious to all of us that it is not possible for any government to protect its citizens from the kind of terrorism that exists today. It is not possible. No government can do that. Now, though that sounds like an obvious, I don't think that that is really read properly. In other words, everything about our acceptance of the authority of the state is that the state has a responsibility to us in return. And the basic promise of the state is that it is going to protect us. It is going to provide us with a secure environment. We are going to have access to all the things that our citizens need, education and so forth and so on. But the city-state, the whole development of what we see as the political reality has all been based on a fundamental protection of the citizen. And when you begin to see the deterioration of these kinds of cross-of-planning organizations, you're seeing it. That's the first aspect of it. By the way, it didn't start with these terrorists. It started with the anarchists of the 19th century. The 1880s to around 1920, there was a movement of anarchists, particularly here in Europe, who were basically doing the same thing. It was just less powerful in terms of how many people they would kill. But the reality is that we have already moved into an environment where institutions are beginning to suffer. For example, you can see that in democracies. Because if you look at any mature democracy, anytime you have an election, you're lucky if 40% of the people vote who can, which, by the way, ends up being about 20% of the population or less. In other words, the very institutions that this whole cycle has brought us, that we were so proud of, that we fought for in the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s, we're finally at this peak and now they're falling apart. So if you've got the 4037, what you're here to see is that you're here to see the organization of the community. And you're here to see whether it's functioning or not. It's not that you're necessarily a bedrock of that community because you have that channel defined through your nodes. But it does mean you're going to be part of that because it's your activation. But what it really means is you're going to see it. You're somebody that, you need to have cross-of planning people if you're ever going to have an organization of any kind. In this age. Ilse is a 4037. This is the way it works. You have cross-of planning, you make a plan, you go through the plan, you build an organization. This has been our theme for 400 years. And it's coming to an end. And 4037 nodes, they're really here to see that. They're here to see other things too. They're here to see whether you're ready to work or not. They're here to see whether you're ready to care or not. I mean, they see these things. And they see whether or not there is loyalty to the organization. 4037s are forever being able to see where there is loyalty and where there isn't loyalty. And when you have those as your eyes, you see that in the society around you. You see it. You see those that obey the rules and those that don't obey the rules. You see all of that. I mean, the police are part of 4037. I mean, it's part of how communities stay secure, protected. So 4037 eyes are always looking. Now, right now, if you have 4037 nodal people, personality nodes, who are operating correctly, they're going to be our witnesses. They're the ones who are going to notice how everything is slowly breaking down. You think that our global community could actually handle bird flu if it went human to human? We have these 4037 concepts that we've been living with for 400 years that say the better organized we are, the more we're going to be able to do all these things. And we have reached the limits of what we're able to do. Look at the amount of research and money. Something like $100 billion a year goes into cancer research. And equal money going into AIDS research and whatever. We've got retroviruses, that will eat away our organizations instantly. They're out there. So the 4037 is here to see the organized environment, but also to be able to see in this time, have the sensitivity to see where it is breaking down, because it is breaking down. If you have...
עודף הפרטים ועודף הרבה אחד על אחדים שאני כאילו מדברת אליהם במשמש הזה ואז מצד שני זה this is as is, זה ככה זה הייחודי שעובר דרכי, ותוך כדי לראות את זה שאנחנו שאני רואה שזה ייקח אולי עוד לפחות שנתיים לנקות את איזושהי נימה מתנצלת על כך שאני משתפת בצורה שאני משתפת את הדברים. זה מה שאני רואה על עצמי כרגע. אולי אני שומעת קולות מאחרים כן, אז כאילו... אנחנו לקראת... הנה, כביכול אני אקפוץ רגע לקרוסים שאני היום... ככה מתחילה בלקחת צילומי מסך עבור הקרוס הבא שניכנס אליו, ואז אני מצאת את עצמי מול המון וריאציות. אז זה אותו כלים שאנחנו יכולים להשתמש בהם, אתה עוזר לי להתמצא בתוך הדברים האלה וגם ללכת לאיבוד בהם. אז כשאנחנו נגיע ל-51 היום בלילה, ואז אנחנו רואים פה 24 תוצאות. אנחנו נגיע פה. ואז נגיע פה ופה. וזה יעבור מהר, וזה יעבור קצת יותר מהר מזה, וזה יעבור יחסית לאט, כי בזווית ימין קיים לנו יותר פרופילים. 7, ואז אחד כזה, ועוד איזה 3, 4, לא עולה לי בדיוק כרגע הנתונים לכמות הקרוסים שאנחנו עוברים, הפרופילים שאנחנו עוברים בקרוס. ועל הקרוס הזה, זאת אומרת על השאר הזה, על 51-57, שזה יגיע, אני לוקחת גם לזה סקרינשוט היום בלילה.
The 51st gate, the arousing, in the heart center, pointed at the G center, to its harmonic gate, the 25th gate, innocence, forming the channel of initiation, a design of needing to be first. And the 51st gate is the gate of shock. This is the ability to respond to disorder and shock through recognition and adaptation. Now, the whole thing about the nature of the 51st gate is, to begin with, this is an ego gate. And of course, as an ego gate, it operates in two very, very, very distinct ways. When you're dealing with somebody who has the 51st gate in a defined ego, that 51st gate is going to operate in that sense consistently. And in operating consistently, it is going to have the power to be able to commit itself to whatever lies before it, as long as it can get the rest that it needs. Remember that one of the most interesting things about the ego is that any active ego, any defined ego, needs to be able to have rest in order to recover its power. This is why the theme of arousing is so important to understand. It is not an easy thing to rouse the ego. You know, the ego is not the sacral center. The heart center and the sacral are very different from each other. You know, the heart center is something that, you know, like the heart itself, you know, there is this process of, you know, working and not working, working and not working, working and not working. And this is one of the most dynamic themes of the ego. If you have the 51st gate in an undefined ego, the majority of humanity have an undefined ego, then you're caught in a deep dilemma. You know, this drive and this arousal of the ego is never consistent. More than that, the undefined ego suffers psychologically very deeply as not self. In other words, if you have an undefined ego, there is a sense that one is not valued, that one is not worthy, that one doesn't get the respect that one deserves, that one doesn't, you know, that one is always constantly needing to prove something to the other and prove things to oneself, and this becomes the way in which the mind works. And within that context, if you have the 51st gate in an undefined ego, then of course you end up dealing with things, dealing with the shock of things, dealing with the competitiveness of situations in which you are not prepared. Not only that, but unprepared and inflated at the same time. The first line of the 51 says very clearly that it's about reference. It is about the advantage of previous crisis experience. It is the gift of re-examination that is the foundation of preparedness, the power of the ego conditioned by experience. And it's something, you know, very, very important to understand. That is that Only the defined ego has a consistent experience with handling shock. And only the defined ego has a consistent experience with being shocking, and therefore develops a way in which, through experience, that they can deal with those situations. But the undefined ego, because it is not consistent, that it never really gets the opportunity to truly gain experience in how to deal with or how to be that shocking force. The 51, as the only ego gate pointed at the self, that this channel of initiation is one that carries enormous mystical potential. However, the mystical potential, the capacity of the 51 to leap into the void, that again, that this is something that only when the being is operating correctly is that something that is going to be fruitful. You know, the greatest dilemma of all, for everyone, in activations that they have, gates that they have, that are in open centers, that rather than operating according to their nature, according to their authority, according to their strategy, that they end up operating according to the conditioning. And that conditioning leads to disaster. And of course, when you're dealing with the 51st gate, what you're dealing with is the potential of the loss of innocence. So to operate correctly as yourself, this is the real key. Only then is true arousal possible. The 57th gate, the gentle, in the splenic center, pointed in many directions. Many harmonic gates, because the 57th gate is the awareness root of the integration channels. The 57 forms a relationship with the 34th gate, the power of the great. And in that they form the channel of power, a design of the archetype. And with the 10th gate, forming the channel perfected form, a design of survival. And with the 20th gate, the brainwave, a design of awareness. In other words, the 57th gate is a font. It is perhaps the most diverse and the most deep of all of the awareness gates, and it is a gate of intuition. Its description, the extraordinary power of clarity, the gentle. In the traditional I Ching, this was the gentle breeze that could chill you to the marrow. In other words, this is the deep, deep power of intuition, and it is intuition that is at the very basis of our survival, because this is what integration is all about. It is the backbone of individual survival. If you look at the first line, and remember that first lines of hexagrams always provide you with a foundation, a basis upon which to look at the hexagram, that you have the gift of penetrating to the inner meaning that assures timely action, the possibility of the intuition penetrating to the inner meaning, but also the possibility that confusion will overpower the intuition. And so this line of confusion, this is the essence of the work of the 57th gate, is to penetrate confusion, because confusion is everywhere. And the confusion is all about the same thing. When you look at the splenic center is a fear center. It is a fear that drives our immune system. It is our immune system, through this motivation of fear, that develops the strategies for survival. Each of the gates of the splenic system have a primary fear associated with them. And the 57th gate, it is the fear of tomorrow. And you can see very clearly that the fear of tomorrow is very complex, because the 57th gate simply doesn't point to one other harmonic gate, but goes in 3 directions. The fear that we will not have the power to deal with tomorrow, the fear that we will not have the right behavior to be able to survive in the world of tomorrow, the fear that in the now that we are at risk. Always this fear, this deep underlying fear that's at the root of the 57th gate. It is something to be clear about. That intuition is the primary protection of the life. It's the primary protection, and it is acoustic. And it is one of the deepest aspects of the 57th gate, is the fact that it is deeply attuned to the acoustic world. You know, this moment that, you know, you're on a camping trip and there's this incredible silence, and all of a sudden there's the breaking of a twig. And the ears perk up. I mean, the ears perk up in a way that you actually hear, you know, the blood running in your own ear because you're so focused on the hearing. Well, the 57th gate is like that all the time. It's like that all the time. It's constantly acoustically attuned. Now, one of the things about the 57th gate is that in our biology, it represents the right ear. The left ear, by the way, is on the other side in the solar plex center, the 22nd gate. And it is something very important to grasp in this. The right ear is your spontaneous existential hearing. Your spontaneous existential hearing. In other words, if you're putting the telephone to your left ear, you're hearing things over a wave, and you never hear things precisely for what they are in the moment. When you hear with your right ear, you're hearing in the now, and you're hearing what you need to know in the now. And so, in dealing with, living with the 57th gate, there is a deep key. And the key is listen to your intuition. Respect your intuition. It is a guide to the perfection of your form, to the perfection of the archetype of strategic survival, and your ability to operate correctly, awake in the now.
Not too long ago, we had the 51-57 nodal polarity in the transiting field. We're in the 21-48 at present. And it's something to think about, is that as the nodes transit daily in the transiting field, that you're seeing the way in which the program wants all of us to see. And, after you go through a process of digesting this information, it's very interesting to then see the transiting nodes and to read your newspapers and, watch TV and look at the talking heads, and right away you'll see that they seem to be seeing what the program wants them to see, and they see it exactly that way. So we had the 51-57, the 51st gate is the arousing. It is a gate of the gallbladder, and it is a gate of gall, of nerve. It is also a gate of foolishness. It can be a gate of courage. However, it is an ego gate. And everything about the 51st gate is that the 51st gate is about shock. It's about shock. So if you have somebody who has the 51st gate as a nodal gate, they are going to see the shocks out there. They are going to see the courage, they are going to see the foolishness, they are going to see the things that impact the other. They're the kind of being that can see in a crowded space, walking through something happening to somebody else that frightens them, shakes them up, whatever the case may be. You see these things, they're out there. You seem to be tuned to them. On the other side, you have the 57. And this is the gentle, and this is perhaps the most aware of all gates as a potential. It is an awareness that is profound enough to impact all the other three gates of integration. So it is awareness that guides the 34, the 10, and the 20. So it has quite a capacity. Everything about it is that this is our acoustic intuition at its height. And in the 51-57, because we're dealing with individual gates, we are dealing with the acoustic domain, if you will. In other words, these are people that hear things really well. In other words, when they're looking out in the world, what they're looking for is, or what they're tuned to is certain things they hear out there in the world. These are people that can pick up on gossip, as an example, and stuff like that. They hear a lot of stuff. 57th gate is a gate of deep, deep, deep intuition. Intuition, but intuition for what? 57th gate is the fear of tomorrow. So when you're looking out at the world with 57 eyes, you see a world in which everyone, at some level, is afraid. Afraid of what's going to happen, afraid of the future, fear and shock. And while we had that nodal transit, there was the bombing in London, as an example. And all the television sets across the planet, they were all seeing what the nodes were bringing in the transit. The transit was, here's the 51, 57 nodes. We would like you to see shock and fear of tomorrow. So here is shock, and some of them even had headlines that were exactly keynotes, right? And that's what everybody got to see. The program delivers. I watched. And it was so cute the next day. Same nodes, eh? The next day, there are these camera people in the subway, right? Doing interviews with people about, are you afraid of what could happen today? Or what a shock. I heard the word shock so often. It was fantastic. And at the same time, I don't, people died, blah, blah, blah. But, this is, nonetheless, the nodes were doing their job. Within a matter of about 12 hours, I always have the news running somewhere. And there was an Air France airplane that crash landed in Toronto. And I watched it live. The serendipity of being in a CNN world, right? Within moments of this thing happening, I'm right there, right? And it's a horrific scene. Right? Here's this plane and there's huge flames raging, and the announcers are talking about, oh, this doesn't look good, and they're already counting the dead. And aside from the fact that they're into their shock and fear of tomorrow, one of the first things the guy said was, boy, you wouldn't want to be standing in the airport lounge waiting for your plane watching this one, right? Because it comes burning along the runway, right? Are you going to get on your flight? But you see, at the same time, the 57th gate is the most profound survival gate we have. It is the deepest intuition for survival that is in us. And the thing about that was that everybody got off alive. Everybody. Rather amazing. All these people. And the announcers were so deflated. It was very odd. They had gotten into this heavy, they're all dead. And suddenly they're all alive. And it's almost as if they didn't want to believe it. It really took a while for them to build their enthusiasm level. Oh, they're alive. Oh, good. Television hates a good story. That was very funny. Oh, well. So if you've got the 51, 57, you're going to see these things. You walk down the street, you see somebody getting mugged. You can see things like that. And you also see those things that are out there that truly shock the other. You see a world in which there is this fear of tomorrow. You can smell the fear on people because you see it. And you hear all that, you know all that through what they say, because you can hear it in the acoustic frequency.